Before we begin, don't forget to like this video if you enjoy content like this. It really helps the channel grow and keeps these relaxing, in-depth videos coming. Also, subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss future uploads. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from and what time is it right now? Let me know in the comments below. Now, let's begin our journey. The story of the human mind is the story of all of us. It is not merely the tale of neurons and brains, but of how we came to understand, question, and dream. Long before modern science began peering into the mechanics of cognition, long before language or civilization, the human mind was already awakening, slowly, subtly, through a vast stretch of time we barely comprehend. Imagine, if you will, a world without buildings, without cities, without even the idea of history. The earth is wild, untamed, and ancient. The creatures that roam its forests and plains follow instincts honed over millions of years. Among them walks a being not quite like the others, a hominin, distant cousin to apes, but something is different. It thinks, not in the way we do today, not yet. But a shift has begun. To understand the origin of the human mind, we must go back, way back, over 6 million years into the past. This was the time when the evolutionary path of humans began to diverge from that of other great apes. Our ancestors were not yet human. They were bipedal creatures, like Sahelanthropus chadensis, who roamed the African continent and showed the first signs of an upright posture. This change, seemingly small, would prove monumental. Walking upright freed the hands that would eventually hold tools, gesture in communication, and cradle fire. Hands that would build, destroy, write, and sculpt. The shift to bipedalism changed everything, from the way we interacted with the environment to the way we would think about the world. But still, these early ancestors had minds more primitive than ours. Their brains were small, roughly the size of a chimpanzee's. What then makes them the beginning of our story? The answer lies not in size, but in the slow layering of complexity. Over time, through millions of years of evolutionary pressure, climate changes, predation, competition for food, those creatures who could adapt their behavior ever so slightly had an edge, a sharper memory, a clever trick, a better solution to a survival problem. These tiny cognitive advantages accumulated. Fast forward to about 2.5 million years ago, and we meet a new species, Homo habilis, often called handy man. This hominin used stone tools, basic ones, but tools nonetheless. The making of tools is not just a physical act. It is a mental one. It requires foresight, planning, and understanding cause and effect. The brain of Homo habilis was now larger, about 600 to 750 cubic centimeters, still smaller than ours, but a leap ahead of its ancestors. And yet, this wasn't just about brain size. It was about what the brain could do. What changed in those early minds? Was it imagination, memory, a sense of self? We may never know the exact moment when cognition reached a new level, but we can see signs of it in the archaeological record. By 1.8 million years ago, Homo erectus had arrived. These beings had even larger brains, some approaching 1,000 cubic centimeters. They made more complex tools, hand axes that required skill and technique. But more than that, they began to control fire. The mastery of fire may be one of the most significant milestones in the evolution of the mind. Fire is warmth, protection, a way to cook food, but it is also a symbol of control over nature. It allowed for social gatherings at night, the sharing of stories, perhaps even the first seeds of culture. Around the fire, minds connected. Language may have begun here, in the flickering shadows, with gestures, grunts, and eventually words. No one knows exactly when language evolved, but many researchers believe that Homo erectus was already developing the neural foundations necessary for it. The evolution of the human mind was not a straight line. Different hominin species coexisted, learned from one another, competed, and sometimes interbred. Among them were the Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis, who thrived across Europe and Western Asia. Far from the brutish image once painted of them, Neanderthals had large brains, sometimes even larger than ours. They made tools, controlled fire, wore clothing, and buried their dead. Burial. That's another clue to the awakening mind. To bury the dead is to acknowledge mortality, to perhaps believe in something beyond. The Neanderthals may have had ritual behavior, red ochre found at burial sites, hints at symbolic thought. Was this the first stirrings of religion, of abstract imagination? Around 300,000 years ago in Africa, a new species emerged. Homo sapiens. US, our ancestors. At first glance, they were not so different from other hominins, but something began to shift. Slowly at first, then dramatically. The archaeological record explodes with creativity, cave paintings, beads, musical instruments, statues. This is the cognitive revolution, the point at which the human mind seems to leap ahead. But why? What changed? Some scientists propose that a mutation led to a reorganization of the brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex, the seat of planning, abstraction, and imagination. Others believe it was the pressures of social life. Living in larger groups required more complex communication, memory, and empathy. Whatever the reason, Homo sapiens began to think differently. They could hold multiple ideas in their minds at once. They could imagine things that did not exist, gods, nations, futures. They could tell stories, and stories, shared narratives, are perhaps the most powerful invention of the human mind. With storytelling came culture. Myths explained the world, bonded communities, and passed down knowledge. Art captured emotions and experiences. Music gave rhythm to ritual and celebration. The mind was no longer just a tool for survival. It was a source of meaning. As Homo sapiens spread across the globe, from Africa to Europe, Asia, Australia, and the Americas, they brought their minds with them, shaped by the environments they encountered, yet always curious, always reaching. They adapted to ice and desert, to forest and mountain. They invented, they imagined, they remembered. And they never stopped wondering. Even today, we are descendants of that long, wandering journey. The minds in our heads bear the echoes of millions of years of adaptation, mystery, and creativity. We live in cities now, surrounded by technology and noise, but deep within us is the mind that once stared into a fire and asked, why? That question, why, may be the most human of all. As the cognitive abilities of early humans evolved, the complexity of their social lives grew in parallel. The human mind is not a solitary instrument. It developed in the context of others, in family groups, in tribes, in communities. And perhaps the greatest evolutionary force that shaped our minds was not the environment, but each other. Imagine life in a small band of early humans, perhaps 20 to 50 individuals. These were tight-knit groups where everyone depended on everyone else. Cooperation wasn't just helpful, it was essential. The mind learned to read emotions, to predict intentions, to build trust and avoid betrayal. From this social pressure emerged what researchers call theory of mind, the ability to understand that other people have thoughts, feelings, and beliefs that may be different from your own. This mental skill is foundational to empathy, to teaching, to lying, to storytelling, and to all forms of complex interaction. It may seem obvious to us now, but the development of theory of mind marked a profound leap forward. Children today begin to demonstrate theory of mind around age 4, but its origins go back hundreds of thousands of years. It likely began in rudimentary form with our primate ancestors. Chimps and bonobos show early signs of it, but only in humans did it blossom into something powerful enough to support entire civilizations. And with social intelligence came another crucial trait: language. Language is the most remarkable cognitive tool we possess. It allows us to transmit knowledge across time and space, to build shared realities, to encode memories and aspirations in sound. No one knows exactly when spoken language began, because sound leaves no fossil record. But clues lie in the shape of the skull, in the development of the hyoid bone, in the genetic footprints of the FOXP2 gene, believed to be linked to our capacity for speech. By the time Homo sapiens emerged, we had likely developed fully functional language. Not just a set of signals, but grammar, syntax, and metaphor. Language was the operating system of the human mind. It allowed for cumulative culture. A child could learn from the experiences of her ancestors, not just from what she observed, but from what she was told. And so knowledge grew, slowly at first, but it grew. Language also helped us do something deeply human: tell stories, to narrate events not just as they are, but as they might be. Fiction, imagination, what if? These three words may be among the most important in our development. What if we tried it this way? What if the storm returns? What if there is something watching us from the sky? Imagination allowed us to simulate possible futures, to learn without experiencing danger, to plan, to innovate, and to create. And with imagination came belief. Early humans began to craft explanations for the world around them. The sun, the stars, the wind, mysterious and powerful forces were given meaning through myth. Spirits and gods became part of the mental landscape. Whether or not the supernatural was real, the belief in it was. And belief shaped behavior. Religion, in its early forms, likely served many purposes. It helped enforce moral norms, provided comfort in the face of death, and unified communities under shared rituals. But from a cognitive standpoint, it was another demonstration of our ability to abstract, to imagine unseen forces, to attribute intention to nature, to connect cause and effect, even where no logical link existed. This tendency to see patterns, to find meaning, may have been evolutionarily advantageous. Better to falsely assume the rustle in the grass is a predator than to miss the warning sign. Our brains became hyper-attuned to agency. We saw faces in the clouds, spirits in the forest, destiny in the stars. As minds became more complex, so too did memory. Memory is the foundation of identity. Without it, there is no self, no continuity, no learning. But memory is not a passive recording of events. It is an active, ever-changing reconstruction. The human brain does not store experiences like files in a cabinet. It recreates them every time we recall. This plasticity makes memory powerful and flawed. We can imagine the future using the same neural circuits we use to remember the past. We revise memories, exaggerate them, forget them, and even create false ones. Yet this same system allows us to plan, to empathize, to dream. Our ancestors did not only remember what happened, they remembered how it felt. Emotional memory is a critical survival tool. It teaches us what to seek and what to avoid. It colors our perception of the world, and it helps bind us to others through shared experience. And what about the sense of self? Self-awareness is often taken for granted, but it is a monumental achievement of the mind. The ability to reflect on one's own thoughts, to ask, "Who am I?" This is a relatively rare trait in the animal kingdom. Some animals show signs of it: dolphins, elephants, certain birds, and great apes. But humans live inside a persistent narrative of self. We think of ourselves as continuous beings, despite the fact that every cell in our body changes over time. This illusion of constancy is created by memory, by language, by imagination. We remember our childhood, even if imperfectly. We speak our names. We imagine our future. All of this creates a cohesive sense of identity. And identity is not merely individual. The human mind began to conceive of collective identity: family, tribe, nation, species. We are not just I, we are we. This mental shift allowed for cooperation on massive scales. By 70,000 years ago, humans were spreading across continents. With language, memory, imagination, and identity in hand, they adapted to every environment they encountered. They built boats to cross water, tools to hunt new prey, clothing to withstand ice, and wherever they went, they carried their stories. It is around this time that we begin to see art. In caves, on rocks, carved into bone and ivory, images of animals, people, handprints. These are more than decorations. They are communication across time, a whisper from the past. To paint an animal on a wall is to understand that symbols can stand for reality. It is to imagine what is not present, and perhaps to hope that drawing the hunt will bring success. This is magical thinking, but also the root of symbolic thought, mathematics, and all abstract reasoning. Music, too, begins to appear in the archaeological record. Flutes made from bird bones, percussive instruments, rhythms passed from hand to hand, voice to voice. Music connects minds in ways few other things can. It synchronizes emotion, fosters unity, and transcends language. And so, by the time humans began forming the first settled communities, nearly 10,000 years ago, the human mind was already ancient in its capabilities, but the shift to agriculture and the rise of civilization would bring new challenges and new mental adaptations. As people began to live in larger groups, anonymity emerged. In small bands, everyone knew everyone. In villages and towns, that changed. Trust had to be extended beyond personal relationships. This gave rise to social systems, laws, norms, and structures to guide behavior. Money, for example, is a fiction. It works only because we believe in its value. Writing, too, was invented, not for poetry, but for accounting. Keeping track of crops, trade, and taxes required a new kind of memory, external memory. Writing expanded the mind's reach, no longer limited to what could be held in memory or spoken aloud. Thoughts could be preserved, refined, and shared over vast distances and generations. And with writing came history. For the first time, the human story could be told, not just through myth or oral tradition, but through deliberate record. The mind was now recording itself. But with all this complexity, the fundamental questions remained. Where did we come from? Why are we here? What happens after we die? These questions did not vanish with civilization. They deepened. The evolution of the human mind did not stop with the invention of language or cities. It continues. Every discovery, every philosophy, every innovation is an extension of the journey that began millions of years ago with a creature who stood upright and looked around and began to wonder. As human societies grew more complex, so too did the architecture of thought. The brain, molded by millions of years of evolution, was now being shaped by culture. Culture, in turn, was not static. It was alive, passed down through language, ritual, and imitation. And so the mind, once purely biological, became increasingly cultural. This interplay between biology and culture is at the heart of human cognition. The mind is not simply a product of the brain. It is also a reflection of the environment in which the brain operates. And in human history, that environment became increasingly symbolic. Symbols are the backbone of human thought. They allow one thing to stand in for another. A circle with a line through it might represent prohibition. A flag might represent a nation.
A word represents an idea, a number, a quantity. These layers of abstraction form the basis of language, mathematics, and even morality.
But how did the mind learn to handle symbols so fluidly? One theory is that our ancestors' need to communicate social status, intent, and affiliation pushed the mind to become increasingly adept at interpreting and creating symbolic signals. Clothing, ornaments, posture, even the rhythm of speech, all could convey meaning beyond the literal. Consider body language. Long before humans wrote poetry or built cities, we were reading subtle cues in each other's faces and movements. A raised eyebrow, a slight frown, a turned shoulder. These signs carried emotional weight. The ability to accurately read these signs could mean the difference between alliance and conflict. And then came the leap. Instead of just reading signals, humans began to construct them. Jewelry, tattoos, face paint, and clothing all became ways to send messages about beauty, power, tribe, or belief. These were the first social codes, and understanding them required an increasingly sophisticated mind. With symbolic reasoning in place, human thought entered a new dimension, the moral. Morality is one of the great achievements of the human mind. It is not simply a set of rules. It is a way of thinking that considers others, weighs outcomes, and anticipates consequences. It is the voice that says, what is right, even when no one is watching. But where did morality come from? Anthropologists believe that moral reasoning evolved as a necessity in cooperative societies. For a group to function, individuals must be able to trust each other. Those who cheat, lie, or steal can disrupt the balance. Over time, societies developed codes of conduct, not always codified in law, but deeply embedded in custom and expectation. The mind adapted to this moral environment. It developed guilt and shame as internal regulators. Empathy allowed one to feel what another might be feeling. Fairness became a principle to guide behavior, and storytelling helped transmit moral lessons. Every ancient myth and parable from every corner of the world contains within it a moral message. But morality is not monolithic. What is considered virtuous in one culture may be taboo in another. This variability suggests that while the capacity for moral reasoning is universal, its expression is culturally constructed. This, too, speaks to the plasticity of the mind. Human thought is not fixed. It can be shaped, refined, even transformed by new experiences. Education, for example, is not just about acquiring information. It's about training the mind to think in particular ways. Logic, rhetoric, mathematics, and ethics are all systems developed to discipline the mind, and these systems are ancient. In ancient Mesopotamia, scribes learned to write on clay tablets, developing early systems of administration and calculation. In Egypt, priest scholars kept meticulous records of astronomy, medicine, and the movements of the Nile. In India and China, philosophical traditions emerged that would shape civilizations for millennia. Confucius pondered the role of virtue in society. The Buddha explored the nature of suffering and consciousness. In Greece, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle asked what it meant to know, to be, to live well. These thinkers did not just reflect their societies. They reshaped them. They took the raw material of human thought and forged it into disciplines. Philosophy, in particular, is the study of the mind by the mind. It is thought reflecting upon itself, and it asks the deepest questions. What is real? What is true? What is good? What is the self? In doing so, it exposes the power and the limitations of the mind. For all its brilliance, the human mind is not a perfectly rational machine. It is biased. It is emotional. It is shaped by forces both visible and invisible. Psychologists have uncovered dozens of cognitive biases, mental shortcuts that help us survive, but often lead us astray. We overestimate our knowledge. We seek confirmation over contradiction. We remember emotionally charged events more vividly than neutral ones. And yet, it is through this imperfect mind that we have built everything we know. Science, art, law, religion, all are products of the same organ that once puzzled over fire in a cave. The mind has scaled mountains, plunged into oceans, and peered into the fabric of space and time. It has mapped genomes, split atoms, and written symphony. It has also imagined monsters, created gods, and invented games. It daydreams. It mourns. It wonders. One of the most intriguing capacities of the mind is metacognition, the ability to think about thinking. This recursive loop allows us to reflect, revise, and refine our ideas. It is what allows a writer to edit a sentence, a musician to hear a wrong note, or a scientist to rethink a theory. Metacognition also allows for introspection, the quiet turning inward of the mind upon itself. Through introspection, we become aware not just of thoughts, but of awareness itself. This self-reflective loop may be at the core of what we experience as consciousness. And what is consciousness? That remains one of the greatest mysteries. Philosophers, neuroscientists, and mystics have all sought to define it. Is it the result of neural complexity, an emergent property of information processing, or is it something deeper, something irreducible? No one knows for certain. What we do know is that consciousness allows us to suffer, to hope, to dream. It allows us to form identity, to construct meaning, and to experience beauty. It is the light in which all experience is illuminated, and perhaps most importantly, it allows us to change. The human mind is not static, it is dynamic, evolving with each new experience. It can overcome trauma, learn new skills, and alter its beliefs. Through mindfulness, therapy, education, and reflection, the mind can rewire itself. This neuroplasticity is one of the defining features of our species. It means we are not locked into the past. We are, quite literally, capable of becoming different versions of ourselves. And this is not merely poetic, it is biological. Studies show that learning changes the structure of the brain. Meditation alters neural pathways. Trauma leaves marks, but so does healing. The mind is both fragile and resilient. It can break, but it can also rebuild. In a sense, the story of the human mind is a story of reinvention. From ape to artist, from survival to philosophy, from instinct to introspection, we have always been in the process of becoming, and that process is far from over. As civilization advanced, the human mind began to externalize more and more of its inner workings. Writing systems, maps, architectural plans, musical notation. Each of these was a way for the internal contents of the mind to be expressed and preserved in the outside world. In doing so, humans began to build not only physical structures, but cognitive architectures. Entire systems of thought encoded in symbols, languages, rituals, and institutions. The written word transformed human memory. What once had to be passed from mouth to ear could now be recorded and revisited. Epic poems, once dependent on bardic memory, were now etched into clay and carved into stone. Laws were no longer just traditions. They could be codified, made consistent, and enforced. The mind, once fleeting and ephemeral, now left durable traces. But writing did more than extend memory. It reshaped it. The shift from oral to literate culture changed how people thought. Oral cultures emphasize memorization, repetition, and communal storytelling. Literacy, by contrast, encouraged abstraction, categorization, and individual contemplation. In the silent solitude of reading, new dimensions of thought emerged: deep analysis, critical reasoning, inner dialogue. This transformation can be seen across the ancient world. In Greece, philosophers began to question the very nature of knowledge. In China, scholars compiled histories and developed complex ethical systems. In India, meditative traditions explored the inner workings of the mind itself. Each culture, in its own way, was grappling with what it meant to be human and using the tools of thought to answer that question. These tools, however, were not only used for reflection, they were also used for power. The mind is not only a seeker of truth, it is also a social organ shaped by status, conformity, and belief. As societies grew larger and more hierarchical, the minds within them adapted. They learned to navigate roles, to obey authority, to manage impressions. The desire for approval and fear of rejection, once adaptive in small tribes, became powerful tools of control in empires and kingdoms. Religions played a central role in shaping thought. They provided shared narratives, moral frameworks, and existential meaning. Whether through the commandments of the Torah, the Dharma of Hinduism, the teachings of the Buddha, or the revelations of the Quran, religions shaped how people saw themselves, their communities, and the universe. But they also raised deeper questions. What is the soul? Is the mind separate from the body? What happens after death? These questions ushered in a new era of introspection. Philosophers and theologians began to explore dualism, the idea that the mind or soul is distinct from the physical body. In the West, this idea was most famously articulated by René Descartes, who declared, "I think, therefore I am." Descartes believed that the mind was the one certainty in an uncertain world, a thinking, conscious self that could not be doubted, but not all agreed. Materialists argued that the mind arises entirely from the brain and that consciousness is a byproduct of biology. Others, especially in Eastern traditions, saw the self not as a fixed identity, but as an illusion, a temporary configuration of awareness, constantly changing and fundamentally interconnected with all things. These competing views, mind as spirit, mind as brain, mind as process, continue to this day. But regardless of the answer, the very act of asking reveals something extraordinary. The mind can turn upon itself. It can question its own nature. This reflexivity is uniquely human. Animals can act, plan, even solve problems. But only humans seem to ask, "What is thinking?" or "Who am I?" This capacity has led to countless schools of thought, from ancient Stoicism to modern cognitive science, and each has tried, in its own way, to map the invisible terrain of the mind. But what happens when the mind turns not inward, but outward, toward the world it inhabits? This, too, has been a major force in our cognitive evolution. From the earliest cave paintings to the telescopes of modern astronomy, humans have tried to understand their place in the cosmos. We gaze at the stars, not merely out of curiosity, but out of something deeper, a yearning to find meaning, to belong, and in doing so, we built models of the universe. The ancient Babylonians tracked the movement of planets. The Greeks developed geometry to explain the heavens. The Maya built calendars that synchronized with celestial cycles. These were not just scientific tools, they were cognitive maps. They helped the mind organize experience, impose order, and predict the future. Science, in this way, is a natural extension of the human mind's pattern-seeking nature. We are wired to notice regularities. When we see patterns, we infer causes. When we infer causes, we make predictions. When our predictions are confirmed, we gain a sense of control. And when they are violated, we revise our models. This cycle, observe, hypothesize, test, revise, is the foundation of both science and thought itself. But pattern seeking can be a double-edged sword. The same mind that discovers the laws of motion can also believe in omens, superstitions, and conspiracies. We are so attuned to patterns that we often see them where none exist. The rustle in the grass might be the wind, or a predator. Better to be wrong and safe than right and eaten. Evolution favored minds that erred on the side of caution, even if it meant false alarms. This is why, even in modern times, with all our science and knowledge, magical thinking persists. It is not stupidity. It is a feature of the mind's architecture, one that helped us survive in a world of uncertainty. But in today's world, where information is vast and rapid, the mind faces new challenges. Technology has transformed not just how we live, but how we think. The internet, smartphones, social media, these have rewired our attention, our memory, and even our sense of self. Attention, once deep and focused, is now fragmented. The common
constant stream of notifications trains the brain to seek novelty over depth. Memory, once internal, is increasingly outsourced. Why remember facts when they can be Googled in seconds? Even identity becomes performative. Curated profiles, filtered images, digital personas. Some
Scholars worry that this is diminishing the mind, that we are trading reflection for distraction, wisdom for information. Others argue that the mind is simply adapting, as it always has, to a new environment. After all, every major shift in human history has challenged the mind. The invention of agriculture changed how we related to the land. The rise of cities changed how we related to each other. The printing press revolutionized thought. The scientific method redefined truth. The internet is merely the latest chapter in that story. The real question is not whether the mind is changing, it is always changing, but whether we are directing that change consciously. Can we shape the environments that shape us? Can we design technologies that nourish rather than deplete? Can we teach the next generation not only how to use tools, but how to think critically, feel deeply, and live wisely? These are the questions that lie ahead, because the story of the mind is far from over. It is still unfolding with each thought, each idea, each discovery. We are not just passive observers of this story, we are its authors. By the time humanity entered the modern era, the mind had already accomplished so much: language, memory, imagination, morality, and introspection. But in the last few centuries, the pace of mental evolution has accelerated. Not through biology, but through knowledge. Through the accumulation and refinement of ideas, the human mind began to understand itself in ways no species ever had before. The Enlightenment was one of the most transformative periods in the history of thought. In the 17th and 18th centuries, thinkers across Europe began to challenge long-held assumptions. Religion, monarchy, and tradition were no longer accepted by default. They were questioned, analyzed, and debated. Reason became the new torchbearer. This era was not just a change in what people believed, it was a revolution in how they thought. Philosophers like John Locke proposed that the mind at birth was a tabula rasa, a blank slate upon which experience wrote. Others, like Immanuel Kant, argued that the mind was not a passive receiver, but an active participant in constructing reality. These ideas were not just abstract. They laid the foundation for psychology, education, and modern science. Scientific breakthroughs followed. Isaac Newton's laws of motion provided a new framework for understanding the physical world. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution reshaped how we understood life itself, including the evolution of the mind. Suddenly, the human brain was not a divine mystery, but a natural consequence of millions of years of adaptation. The idea that thoughts, emotions, and even consciousness could be products of biology began to take root. This was a profound shift from a soul-centered view of humanity to a brain-centered one. And then, in the 19th and 20th centuries, the mind became the subject of its own science. Psychology emerged as a formal discipline. Pioneers like Wilhelm Wundt, William James, and Sigmund Freud tried to map the inner workings of the human psyche. Wundt focused on introspection, studying the mind through careful observation of experience. James emphasized function, how the
mind helps us adapt. Freud delved into the unconscious, the idea that much of what we think and feel is hidden from awareness. Freud's theories, though controversial, opened the door to exploring the hidden depths of the mind. He introduced ideas like repression, defense mechanisms, and the Oedipus complex. But perhaps his greatest contribution was the notion that the mind is not a single entity, but a dynamic interplay of forces. Soon after, other schools of thought emerged. Behaviorists like B.F. Skinner rejected introspection altogether, focusing instead on observable behavior. To them, the mind was a black box. What mattered was how stimuli produced responses. This approach led to important discoveries in learning, conditioning, and motivation. But it also left something out: the richness of inner experience. And so the cognitive revolution arrived. In the mid-20th century, psychologists began to re-examine the mind, this time with the tools of science and the metaphors of technology. The brain was likened to a computer. It processed information, stored memories, and followed algorithms. This information processing model led to the birth of cognitive psychology. Researchers studied attention, perception, memory, language, and problem solving. They developed models for how information flowed through the mind, how it was encoded, stored, and retrieved. These advances were mirrored by progress in neuroscience. Brain imaging technologies like MRI and PET scans allowed scientists to peer inside the living brain, watching as it responded to different stimuli. Entire maps were created of motor areas, visual cortices, emotional centers, and slowly a new understanding emerged. The mind is not located in a single part of the brain. It is the result of patterns of activity across vast networks. Different regions specialize in different functions, but it is the interaction between them that creates the richness of consciousness. Even more remarkably, the brain is plastic. It changes based on experience. Neurons that fire together wire together. This means that learning reshapes the very structure of the mind. Trauma, too, leaves imprints, not just emotional, but neurological. And healing through therapy, mindfulness, or time can reverse some of that damage.
We are not just born with a mind, we build one moment by moment. In recent decades, another question has begun to dominate the conversation. Can machines have minds? Artificial intelligence, once the stuff of science fiction, is now a reality. Computers can play chess, translate languages, recognize faces, and even compose music. But do they understand? Do they think? This is the question posed by Alan Turing in 1950. His famous Turing test asks whether a machine can imitate human conversation so well that a person can't tell it's artificial. If it can, does that mean it has a mind? Some say yes. Others argue that mimicry is not the same as consciousness. This debate touches on one of the most mysterious aspects of the human mind: subjective experience. It is one thing to process information. It is another to feel it, to be aware, to suffer, to love. This is what philosophers call qualia, the raw, first-person experience of
being. No computer, no matter how sophisticated, can yet claim to have qualia, and so the mystery deepens. At the same time, technology is beginning to merge with biology. Neural implants, brain-computer interfaces, and genetic engineering are blurring the line between the natural and the artificial. The mind of the future may not be entirely organic. It may be enhanced, extended, or even simulated. But even as we look ahead, we carry with us the deep legacy of our evolutionary past. Inside every modern mind are the echoes of ancestral instincts, the fear of the dark, the joy of a shared story, the longing for connection, the thrill of discovery. These are not just emotions, they are ancient patterns woven into the neural fabric by millions of years of survival, and they remind us that the mind is not separate from the body or the world. It is an emergent property of life itself, a way of navigating, interpreting, and shaping reality. It is, in a sense, the universe becoming aware of itself. Think of that for a moment. The atoms in your brain were forged in stars, scattered across space, gathered into molecules, then cells, then neurons, and now they ponder the cosmos. They write poetry, they fall in love, they dream. The mind is not just a product of nature, it is nature's most astonishing expression, and its journey is not yet complete. We still wrestle with the great questions. What is consciousness? Can it survive death? Is it unique to humans? Can it be expanded? Can it be shared? These questions may never be fully answered, but in seeking them, we awaken the deepest capacities of the mind.
curiosity, humility, awe. And perhaps that is the point, not to arrive at certainty, but to live inside the questions, to wonder, to imagine, to explore, because to do so is to be human. The more we uncover about the mind, the more we realize how much we don't know. It is as if each answer uncovers another question, and the deeper we peer into the mirror of consciousness, the more fogged it becomes. Still we keep looking, because the mind is not just a tool for survival, it is a seeker. It seeks knowledge, it seeks connection, it seeks itself. One of the most profound aspects of the human mind is its tendency toward reflection, its relentless desire to understand who and what it is. This search for meaning is not a luxury of the modern age. It is a fundamental part of being human, older than civilization itself. It manifests in many ways, in art, in religion, in philosophy, in science. All of these disciplines at their core are different languages attempting to describe the same thing, our place in the universe. Let's pause and consider art. Art is often dismissed as a luxury, but in truth, it is one of the oldest and most persistent expressions of the human mind. The earliest cave paintings, tens of thousands of years old, speak of a desire to represent the world, to preserve a vision, to communicate beyond the limits of time. What compels someone to draw a handprint on a cave wall, to paint animals in motion, to carve figures from bone? It is not necessity. It is not utility. It is something deeper. The need to express, to connect, to make meaning. This is where the human mind
departs most significantly from its animal roots, not in tool use or problem solving, but in the compulsion to create and to symbolize. Art allowed early humans to project their inner lives into the world. Through shape, rhythm, and color, they could speak the unspeakable. They could say, "This is what I feel," or "This is what I fear," or "This is what I see when I close my eyes." And from art, inevitably, emerged ritual. Ritual is action wrapped in meaning. It takes the invisible, belief, hope, reverence, and makes it visible. From the lighting of fires to the arrangement of stones, from chants and dances to silent prayer, ritual is the mind's attempt to communicate with the unknown. Why did early humans bury their dead? Why did they offer gifts to unseen forces? Perhaps it was grief, perhaps it was gratitude, or perhaps it was the mind's way of saying, "I do not understand this, but I feel that it matters." And this brings us to spirituality. another hallmark of the human mind. Spirituality is the recognition that there may be more than what we can touch or measure. It is not confined to any one religion or doctrine. It is, instead, the quiet voice that says, there is something greater. Whether it is called God, the universe, the source, or the mystery, it reflects the mind's hunger for transcendence. It is important to note that spirituality is not necessarily irrational. Rather, it may reflect a different dimension of rationality, one that is intuitive, experiential, and holistic. The rational mind breaks things apart to understand them. The spiritual mind brings things together to feel them, and both are essential. This duality between analysis and intuition, between reason and feeling, is one of the defining tensions within the human mind. We want to know, and we want to believe. We want to measure, and we want to feel awe. The best minds learn to hold both. Throughout history, the most transformative thinkers have been those who could bridge these domains. Leonardo da Vinci, a scientist and artist. Hypatia of Alexandria, a mathematician and philosopher. Carl Jung, a psychologist and mythologist. These were minds that danced between logic and mystery, fact and imagination, and in doing so, they helped us see that the mind is not a machine. It is a symphony. Different parts of the brain work together in harmony, or sometimes in discord. The limbic system, which governs emotion and memory. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and long-term planning. The occipital lobes, which process vision. The temporal lobes, which manage sound and language, and so much more. But perhaps what is most astonishing is how these systems, so specialized, so mechanical in one sense, give rise to something so fluid, the stream of consciousness. What is consciousness? It is not just awareness. A computer can monitor its surroundings. A camera can record. But consciousness is more than recording. It is the experience of recording, the knowledge that you are knowing, the felt sense of being. To say I am is the beginning of all thought. And yet no one truly knows how this experience emerges from physical matter. How do neurons, firing in sequence, give rise to the color red? The taste of honey, the memory of a summer evening. This is the hard problem of consciousness, a term coined by philosopher David Chalmers. The easy problems of neuroscience, how we detect light, how we form memories, are difficult but tractable. The hard problem is explaining why those functions give rise to experience. Why does it feel like something to be alive? Science has yet to answer this. Some believe consciousness is an emergent property, like wetness is to water. Others propose that consciousness is fundamental, a basic feature of the universe, like space or time. Whatever the case, the fact that we can ponder this mystery is itself a testament to the mind's uniqueness. No other creature, as far as we know, builds temples to thought. No other species debates its own nature or writes poetry about the void. The human mind, for all its imperfections, is capable of astonishing depth. It can love. It can imagine. It can remember. It can suffer. And perhaps most importantly, it can grow. Growth is not just physical. The mind can evolve within a lifetime. A child's mind is not the same as a teenager's or an adult's or an elder's. At every stage, new capacities emerge: curiosity, reason, empathy, wisdom. And each of these capacities can be cultivated. Wisdom, for example, is not simply knowing a lot. It is understanding what matters. It is the integration of knowledge and experience. It is the ability to see beyond the surface, to act with compassion, to make peace with uncertainty. And wisdom may be the final expression of the human mind's potential. It is not loud. It is not fast. It does not seek attention. But it sees clearly. It listens deeply. It knows that all minds are limited, and that in that limitation there is room for grace, because the mind, for all its brilliance, is still fragile. It is susceptible to illusion, to fear, to bias. It forgets, it misjudges, it clings to comfort, it resists change, and yet it keeps going through joy and grief, through failure and discovery. The mind endures. It seeks healing, it seeks meaning, it seeks others, because the mind, in the end, is not meant to stand alone. It is a bridge to the world, to the past, to the future, and to one another. As the human mind continued to evolve, it began to look outward, not only toward the heavens or the natural world, but toward others. Social connection became more than just survival. It became nourishment. We are social beings to the core. From the moment we are born, the mind begins weaving itself into a web of relationships. The gaze of a caregiver, the tone of a voice, the rhythm of language. All of these experiences begin shaping the self before the self can even speak. Attachment theory, developed in the 20th century,
neurons feel. Neurons in the brain fire both when we act.
And when we observe others acting, an elegant neural sign of our interconnectedness. This deep wiring for connection is what makes love so powerful and loss so painful. Grief, for example, is not just an emotion. It is the mind's way of adjusting to a world that has changed. A person who once occupied space in your daily thoughts is suddenly gone, and the mind must rewrite its maps. That pain is real. It's a sign of what mattered, and it is also a sign of the mind's capacity to form deep, meaningful bonds. Community, too, is essential to mental well-being. Studies have shown that loneliness is as harmful to health as smoking. The mind thrives when it feels seen, heard, and held. Rituals, traditions, shared meals, even synchronized movement like dancing or singing, all of these reinforce the sense that we belong. But connection is not always easy. The same mind that longs for closeness also fears vulnerability. Past wounds can become walls. Miscommunication can create distance. Our minds interpret social cues through a lens colored by past experience, mood, and even physical state. That's why compassion toward others and ourselves is a kind of wisdom. It recognizes the hidden struggles, the mental noise, the stories we carry. It softens judgment and opens space for healing. Mental health, then, is not just the absence of illness. It is the presence of clarity, resilience, and connection. It is the ability to sit with one's thoughts without being overwhelmed, to respond rather than react, to live with awareness. Practices like mindfulness and meditation train the mind to observe itself without judgment. They create a pause between stimulus and response, a space where intention can grow. In that space, the mind learns to calm its storms, and in silence, something remarkable happens. The mind begins to listen. It listens to the body, to emotion, to memory, to intuition, and often to the quiet voice beneath all the noise, the voice that asks, what truly matters? That question, timeless and simple, continues to guide the evolution of the human mind as we journey deeper into the story of the human mind. We find ourselves standing on the edge of something vast, the future. And while much of our mental history has been shaped by natural evolution and cultural adaptation, the future of the mind may be something entirely different, because now, for the first time, we are becoming the authors of our own cognitive evolution. Through science,
we are beginning to understand the building blocks of thought, neurons, synapses, neurotransmitters, and with that understanding comes power. We can enhance memory, alter mood, boost focus, suppress pain, even perhaps expand consciousness. Pharmaceuticals already change how minds function. Antidepressants lift dark fogs. Stimulants sharpen attention. Psychedelics, once shunned, are being re-examined for their ability to open the mind in new and healing ways. These are not just medical tools, they are doorways into different mental states. And then there is technology. With brain-computer interfaces, humans may soon control machines with thought alone. With neural implants, memories might one day be recorded and played back. Virtual and augmented reality
are already blurring the lines between perception and invention. These innovations bring promise, but also profound ethical questions. If we can change the mind, what should we change? Who decides? What happens when memory can be edited or attention artificially enhanced? Will there be new forms of inequality between those with access to cognitive enhancement and those without? These are not problems for the distant future. They are arriving now, and they challenge us to ask, what does it mean to be human when the very core of our humanity, our minds, can be modified? In this new era, self-awareness becomes even more critical. We must understand our minds if we are to responsibly shape them. But even as we race ahead, the ancient mind remains within us. It still seeks purpose, still feels joy, still fears the unknown. No matter how advanced our tools become, the longing for meaning will remain. The quiet hunger for love, for truth, for peace, that is timeless. And perhaps that is the wisdom the future needs most. To remember what the mind has always known. That beneath all the complexity, the algorithms, and the circuitry, we are still the same beings who once looked up at the stars and wondered. And so, we come to the end of our journey, or perhaps to the beginning of a new one, from ancient instincts to abstract thought, from cave paintings to quantum theory, from whispered myths to digital minds. The story of human consciousness is a story of unfolding, layer by layer, across time. The mind began as a tool for survival. It learned to detect danger, to remember where the fruit trees were, to understand the intentions of others. But it did not stop there. It became a mirror, reflecting on itself. It became a compass, searching for meaning. It became a vessel for beauty, sorrow, joy, and awe. In
every age, the mind has asked, who am I? Why am I here? What does it all mean? And in every age, the answers have changed, shaped by culture, by experience, by perspective. But the questions remain eternal, patient, waiting for each generation to ask again in its own language. Perhaps that is the true genius of the human mind, not its ability to solve every problem, but its willingness to face the mystery, to sit with not knowing, to gaze into the night sky and feel something stir, to reach out across the limits of self and whisper, I am here. And I wonder, no single theory can explain the mind. No scan can capture your dream. No equation can measure a memory. The mind is not just a pattern of neural firings. It is the dance of biology, history, imagination, and spirit, and it is still becoming. Every thought you think, every word you speak, every kindness you give, adds a new thread to this vast tapestry. The story of the human mind is not finished because the mind is not a destination. It is a journey, and you, dear listener, are part of it. So, wherever you are, whether you're lying in bed or walking through the quiet night, know this: you carry within you the most extraordinary instrument in the known universe, a mind that can feel and wonder and heal, a mind that is ancient and yet still full of possibility, a